Do you all know this song? So please sing along. But y'all, all y'all, if I was from the South. There's a word in it that I'm not supposed to say. It's another state. And I changed it to Alaska. But that other state has 4 syllables in it. Alaska only has 3. So you're calling it Wild Alaska, okay? So just bear that in mind when you're singing along with me so that you don't say that word. Sing.
We're going to have a talk by Vern, Wright, and he must be really special because he's got the same, almost the same last name as Stephen Wright. That makes him even more special, right? He is the former mayor of Wasilla, so we're really privileged to have him here. And if you want to come up.
I'm leaving. We're leaving. Thank you.
I think first, on your little menu of things happening here, take the W out of my name, put an E at the end of my first name, if you ever have to write names or something.
Oh, for crying
All right, as usual, I had to jot some notes or something like this. And I think we all know why we're here. We're here for the same fellow over here, Steve Wright. But I think we need to really think about where are we going in this state and what do we expect from our elected officials and what kind of quality do we want from our elected officials. got me thinking, and I shouldn't do that because my lovely wife Bernadette said stop it. And she left early because they're forming another group out here somewhere. They had a 1 o'clock or 1:30 meeting, a more conservative group that is probably going to try to get more done than what we've seen in the past, you know. And we've all wandered back and forth between different groups. One of the words that came to mind to me this morning was auctoritas, which is Latin, which means prestige, power, club. And its etymology became the English word authority, which is fairly broad in its definition. It was once said the force of authority was described as more than advice, an advice which one may not ignore. And that brings me to, the plate of current elected officials and those trying to re-elect themselves, and others that want to take those places other than Steve. Cicero, I'm sure a few of you, probably all of you, are familiar with the name Cicero. He was a Roman senator, a statesman, a lawyer. He understood the Roman code, and a senator. And his words have come down to us for over 2,000 years, for millennium, because it's still studied today, not just in philosophy, but it's also studied in law and found in the law, ensconced in the American common law. And the interesting thing about Cicero, he stated once, while power resides in the people, authority, or club, rests with the Senate, more than in the people's house, because it's a smaller, deliberative body, more centralized, and it runs on a lot of clout. He did that in a vain attempt to uphold Republican principles which Rome was based on. Similar to ours, but not quite the same kind of Republicanism, but very close. We patterned ourselves from some of that. And it was during the crisis in the first century BC, and he tried to talk his fellow senators and the rest into staying true to their Republican concepts and ideologies as they understood it. And anybody else know how he was thanked?
Killed?
Chopped his head off. Hence, there's so many of those Roman senators of ancient days, we don't even know who they were. Very few names come down, but Cicero survives. And there must be a reason for that. Because it is that one thread that talks about liberty and morality and all the things that are in right form of government. And as we can see, the tool in Alaska is the beheading of senators, and we've seen it time and time again, let alone House members, and by being thrown out of the binding caucus. Now, I can make bathroom jokes about binding, but I won't. But the binding caucus, they're tossed out, but those self-appointed few that are in the inside, that are carrying the clout, the stroke, the authority, and none, hardly at all, dare confront them on it. And yet, they may be elected officials, but who elected them? Now, 2 House districts make up about 37,000 residents. Everybody vested as a citizen of the state of Alaska, that own our own franchises, free and independent liberty-seeking people. And yet we have this binding caucus system in this state that I know is not heard of in any other states. It's all or nothing. And it all depends on what they think the all is, and you get nothing when it's all done. Like I said, they were self-appointed persons who shepherdized that club and power themselves into a few hands and punish a senator who represents over 36,000 people. Out of the 20 senators, everybody's got 36,000 constituents plus. Well, who's being disenfranchised? So, they threatened them with taking away the trappings. How many people have been in Juneau? How many people have been in the old courthouse in Anchorage? Better known as the bankruptcy court these days. How many people are from outside Alaska originally? And okay, if you go into your state public buildings, and if they're going back to the early 20th century, the late 19th century, etc., high ceilings, they're grand, you have oak, polished woods, it has all that feel about it. Similar to the governor's mansion on the hill in Juneau. 12-foot, 14-foot ceilings, polished hardwoods. So it works on the mind. So they take away the trappings of that fleeting power by reducing those senators' staffs, their committee assignments, their funds, their spacious offices, and stick them off in corners, rendering them useless in the process, and yet they have about 37,000 constituents. They've been mugged. And it's just not a proper way to do business. They also take away the connections that comes from the influence of money from various sorts, whether it's the state coffers, whether it comes from the lobbyists and other interests, because they have the connections to where that money comes from. Don't give that candidate any money. And I've seen that happen in Juneau. I spent a lot of time in and out of that city. Because they weren't sacrificing themselves to the binding Caucus. They find themselves at the lowest point for the nadir of their fortunes through this. The Constitution of the state of Alaska guarantees us a Republican form of government. And Republican forms of government can be described, they're based on mutual respect, respect of the constituents' differences, harmony, speaking of in harmony, and proper governmental results for concern for the people and not for the elected official and the trappings of the office and the perks and the benefits and the upward mobility of it. Now, I've never gone after another candidate in my life when I was running for office. I think that's, that can get into a quagmire. But I was interested because our election pamphlet came around, and I saw my state senator's page, so I made a copy of it. Because I want to know what these people think and believe. Now, the current state senator was on my city council. I've known him over a dozen years. I've always respected him, got along with him just fine. But then I asked him a question on the website, and he came back with, no, that's not the way it works. Name me the one piece of legislation you're talking about. And I did, and I've never gotten an answer back. It was SB 134 that he co-sponsored with Garantar from Anchorage. And Garantar is a well-known hard-left Democrat. And we know we've got issues with our state Medicaid. And I heard this, I can reduce that part of the budget. Well, under that particular bill, if I recall, and maybe Bert back there from Politidic can tell me I'm wrong. I believe they added another group of people onto the payroll, where they're not no longer doing it by grants and aids and the help from the citizenry. Now they're right on that pay line, right into that pocket. Well, how is that cutting things back? That was just one example. Then I saw him on a YouTube video, and I believe it was Bert in the back room with that red hats on video, where it was a group of people in the Palmer area, and it was a candidates night. And it was some fellow that I believe was retired Army, and he's made a new life in Alaska, and he was trying to pin my senator down. And it was kind of an interesting video. So he said, just answer my question, Senator. And finally, my senator, our senator, because it's 7 and 8, said, my first obligation is to myself. And I went, okay, well, maybe that was a window into his soul. Maybe it was just a frustration blur. But I went back to what he says about himself. He has a master's of business administration. He has an associate's in education, a bachelor of arts in psychology, which also, you have to study philosophy, hence people like Cicero. Because in all the things he's educated in, there's always a component of ethical training. And then I looked at the positions he was holding. Chair of Social Services, beginning in 17. Then he moved to state finance, the creme de la creme, in Senate, after a few issues down there with it. And then state affairs, state transportation. Those are key committees for the Senate. We're in the House, but more so in the Senate. When he said my first obligation to myself, I had to say, what? You're an elected official, my elected official, my friend. Give me a contextualization. You put that in context for me. No, I won't lie to you. I voted for Dave. I encouraged him. I encouraged him to get on my city council. But then when I started hearing that and watching what I've seen in the last year or so, I had to start questioning it. My first obligation is to myself. Well, what? You owe yourself money, so you take it from one pocket and put it in another pocket? I mean, or do I get up early this morning or do I get up late? That's self-regarding from an ethical point of view. And we all take care of our own self-regarding needs. I need more sleep. I want another hot dog, another piece of lasagna. And that's understandable. We're all human beings and we have to eat, we have to sleep, we have to breathe. Some of us still have to smoke and drink wine. But that's fine. That's self-regarding behavior. But in ethics, you have to be directed towards other regarding. And those that seek elective office are deigned to sit in an office to determine our fate and our future and our finances have to be other regarding, not self-regarding, which is my first obligation to myself. They have to take that ethical position, governing a range of their actions involve other people in significant ways. Now, I might have done a good job as mayor, maybe I did a crummy job. Hey, it's been 6 years ago, and I don't get caught in there, and he goes out of office this month after the runoff. So enough times. And I saw Diane Keller last night, the mayor before me. And we all kind of just hide, you know. You want to get out of that public limelight. And so, having though in my history been an attorney recovering, I've been a parole officer, corrections officer, I worked on the pipeline. I'm a former enlisted veteran. I'm also a former officer, military officer. I was an officer in the State Defense Force. That's when you actually put yourself out there, and you have to have, first and primarily when you accept the duty and the obligation, is regard for the other. That means you. That's where it goes first. And here we are, yet another election. Gambling and entering into gambling contracts. And I'm looking at what's going on. I'm looking at the candidate, Dan Field, that now is an independent. Well, why can't you stand up for some principle here? I'm seeing my current senator, on the one hand, who says his first obligation is to himself. I'm thinking to myself, well, is there no stand? If you're standing independent, you're standing in the gap. If you're standing in the gap, it's a long way to the ground. Because you're either warm or cold. You're neither for me nor against me. Please put it in a box. Put it in a context for me. I'm independent because I'm railing against the Democrat Party position. I'm independent because I'm railing against what I see mainline Republicans doing sometimes. Which is it? We're just back in another gambling contract. But after meeting Stephen, reading some of his poetry and magazine and things like that, and my wife made the first introduction, and I kind of trust her judgment. Okay, I'm a good husband. I have to say, I got to know him, but I will always back check somebody before I start really getting involved with them. I want to know something about him. so I can test their metal. You know, if anybody's ever been a fan of Perry Mason, anybody watch that late at night still? Beautiful writing, you know? It's like he's got this wheeling around in his mind all the time. And before he attacks somebody, or he goes in the direction to ask, you know, he knows pretty much which direction that will go. And so, I have to say, Stephen so far has not disappointed me. I believe he's not going to be part of any binding caucus. And there's a number of people saying that these days. But, you know, the halls of government and the positions of power, whether you be a mayor, whether you be a governor, a senator in the state, house rep, all of a sudden it has a tendency, it's like somebody put, you know, shoved a helium hose down your throat and the head just goes, whoa, and they float off into the ozone someplace. Instead of staying grounded. And it's not about how's my tie, how's my hairdo. Look at this beautiful mahogany desk I have because I had these excellent positions. And I don't want to lose this. So how far will you compromise when you're supposed to be serving others? I'm sure there's a few vets in the room. What were you willing to surrender by signing on that line? Your blood, your life, your health, and everything, if you were called. Especially in the vagaries of combat and war. Some of us are Vietnam veterans. A lot of friends of mine saw a heck of a lot worse things than I did. But being a medic in that conflict was enough for me. And I gotta tell you, you have to be willing to give of yourself to serve others. It's just not fancy words. Because what I always seem to find is a lot of people say it and they just don't carry it out. And then what we've seen at the primaries, a number of people that shouldn't have been there to begin with are now gone, who made promises. And they were well recorded. And they have no reason to say why they're not keeping their promises. And I took it personally because when I ran for the first time in 2008, I made certain promises to the people of the city of Wasilla. I said I will get this done, this done, this done, this done, or tell you why I was thwarted. And when I ran the second time in 2011, I was proud to put on my campaign signs, promises made, promises kept. And I lived by that standard. And actually, I think in the last 12 years total, in my 6, and Bert was with me 3.5 and went forward with the forward-looking thing, we've accomplished a lot. Because those were promises made to you, voters, citizens, people that are invested with the franchise and deserve the best to keep this republic and this liberty going, and that we can be honest enough with each other to say, I made a mistake, me, I'm the first one that followed up. Or not come out and say, in the box, what's that, and this and that. There's no way to be. I know that. I started an officers training program with 42 guys, and only 7 of us made it through. Because the cadre, because I went through an infantry reconnaissance LCS, they want to wash you out. Either you're standing there or you're not, at whatever cost. And I think Steve Wright is one of those fellas that's going to get in there and say, you're not going to budge me. Take away the nice desk. Go ahead, take away my staff. I'll adjust. I'll move. And I will still push for a difference. And so that's me. I'm done. And this is going to be a tough one because we know there's been people calling. And we've gotten a couple of calls in my house. Oh, you can't. You're going to break up the vote. You'll hand it to me. I'm like, ah. Well, doing it right now is a tough goal. But whether you make it or you don't make it, your name is out there. And people will remember that. And because I do believe that when you take on obligations, you take on obligations of law. And the things are on the book. And I was always driving from Wasilla out here today, and I'll close with this. It's obvious that the state bought up a lot of right of way to improve, widen the road now to double lane out here to you folks. There goes your lifestyle. You saw it myself. It's just the price of progress. And I know Steve's had a lot of signs around the valley. But then I saw the signs that were sitting right in the middle of these state right-of-ways. Right in the middle of the construction. And I don't need to name them. I don't have to say Wilson, I don't have to say Newfield, I don't have to say that, do I? And some of them running for borough offices. And your signs are traditionally in state right-of-ways and are supposed to be on private property. Who gave you the permission? Why do you write these laws? What, so you can use it as a lever against that guy that does put it on the right-of-way by calling the state DOT, but I'm exempt? And if I can't trust you, at least behave yourself enough to pay attention to the requirements of such a simple law. Why would I trust you to do much else? You can't do the little stuff. Why would I expect you're going to do any better with the big stuff? And I didn't see any of your signs in those right-of-ways. I'll give you that. I never did it, And so really, think about it with your kids, with your spouse. You can't do the little thing. Why would I trust you with the big things? With that, I'll close. Good luck, Steve. You know you got our support.
Thank you.
So, come what may. And thank you very much.
Vern, I want to thank you. Boy, how do you talk like that? We really hit
Rise above it.
really hit on some really key points, and I won't mention any names. We're talking about signs. I know Stevens had some stolen, and one competitor that I won't mention who it is actually saw his sign nailed into a tree, nailed into 4 trees, and that's a no-go. That's not part of the curriculum, that's for sure. So anyway, that just tells you the type of people that are involved in this, which aren't always the type of people that you want running our state. So I just have a couple things that I wanted to say. We're getting a late start. I was really sick for a long time, and they asked me to do a campaign for them and help out. And unfortunately, I got sick even before COVID, not from COVID. I had mono for 1.5 years. If you can imagine that, my body attacked itself. I had it when I was, I guess, a young woman, and it lays dormant and comes back. So I feel that I really let Stephen down. Really need your guys' help to try to get him in. Because Stephen, out of everybody I know, I think really has a shot. He only lost by 406 votes approximately. I think that was the final count. That isn't much to lose by. And I really believe if we hadn't had, I think it was 6 people running, you would have gotten it. You would be there right now. We had a wonderful event planned at Everett's to kick off the campaign in March. Had to be canceled because of COVID. We had a dinner and a dance. We had a lot of people coming. It was really going to be a nice affair. And a silent auction and things going with that. So I'm asking each one of you that when you leave here today, if you can go home, talk to 10, 20 people, mention Stephen. If they don't know him, tell them about the things you learned today. And I thank many of you. We have a donation box back there. The donations from today are going towards radio ads right at the moment. We pretty much have all the signs and things out at this point. So, but the radio ads are going to reach more people than anything else. Signage and radio is where it's at. And social media. Kayla, you're a great person for that. She must have over 1,000 Facebook friends.
3,000.
3,000. There you go. So somebody like her can really spread the word with just a really nice, entry in there, and it can reach a lot of people. So I did want to play one thing for you, And Vern mentioned it about the binding caucus, and that's something that Stephen is really against. And let me see, make sure I get the right one here. Hold on a second.
Do you realize that
That's it.
Alaskans have
That's
missed
it.
out on
Whoops.
a full PFD for the last 5 years? Vote for Stephen Wright. He will renew the binding caucus.
I'll
balance the
replay
budget,
it.
restore and protect our PFD. He's a man of
I
honesty
can't get it
and
to stop,
integrity.
so.
Choose Republican write-in candidate Stephen Wright for State Senate District D. I'm Steve Wright. I approve this message. Paid for by Stephen Wright for State Senate District D. Wasilla and Midway, Alaska.
Okay, so here we go. This is one of the things that just gives you, we only have a few seconds here, just a real nice synopsis of the things that he wants to do and believes in. And I know more in depth, which Stephen will probably talk to you about here in a little bit, about some of the things about PFD and things that he wants to share with you. But here's this. Yeah, it doesn't want to play. Let me go back in.
Do you realize that Alaskans have missed out on a full PFD for the last 5 years? Vote for Stephen Wright. He will renew the binding caucus, balance the budget, restore and protect our PFD. He's a man of honesty and integrity. Choose Republican write-in candidate Stephen Wright for State Senate District D. I'm Steve Wright. I approve this message. Paid for by Stephen Wright for State Senate District D. Wasilla and Midway, Alaska.
So we have, thank you. So we have other ads that are going to be coming out, some that aren't quite as nice as that. It kind of goes after the opponent. Unfortunately, in politics today, can't always win by just being flowery either. We need to show what the other opponent is doing wrong. And unfortunately, it's not a Christian attitude in many ways. It bothers me, but I think it's necessary also, because otherwise people don't know why they should be voting for Mr. Wright. So anyway, let me see here. So we're going to have a musical number by Heather and David Pierce here, and we've got a talk by Stephen, and then we're going to have an auction. So thank you, everyone. Ready?
God mend thine every flaw. thy liberty in love.
Oh, beautiful for heroes proved in liberating strife, who more than self their country love and freedom more than life. America, America, God meant thy gold refine, till all success be nobleness, and every gain divine. Oh, beautiful for patriotry that sees beyond the years, thine alabaster cities gleam, undimmed by human tears. America, America, God shed his grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood, from sea to shining sea.
Thank you so much. That was just beautiful. Every time I hear that song, I get tears in my eyes. So, with further ado, we're all here for this man right now, Stephen Wright, and I don't think he needs an introduction.
All right, first of all, I'd like to thank everybody for coming today to this event, and for everyone that's supported me so far. I'd like to thank Diane for all the effort that she's put into it, and helping with the setup and running my campaign as I ran through the primary. I'd also like to thank my wife for all of her support, and I know she doesn't like it when I run for office, but hey, sometimes you got to do what you got to do. But also want to thank Vern for coming and for the support from Vern, and for Gary Foster, and for the anyway. Yeah, I have some big plans. So, how did I get involved in politics? Well, back after I retired from the military, I went and I taught school in Southeast Alaska for a year at Hyder. And I learned a lot there because we opened a school, and learned a lot about the formula, the student formula for education, and all of that sort of thing. But I think I watched politics from a distance, because when I was in the military for 22 years and in the Air Force, affected us in different ways as we get a Democrat president and then we get a Republican president. And I always noticed that whenever we had the Democrat president, the things that used to be told to us airmen were do more with less, or basically do more with less. And then when we get Republican presidents, it would do less. So, we would always see the support that we needed from a Republican president, and I can see that in the military right now with Donald Trump. And so, after coming back to the Valley, after being in Southeast for a year and opening a school, me and my wife went down to visit our that were in school, and we went down to Vegas as well while we were down there, and we wanted to attend a Trump rally. So we went to one of Trump's first rallies in 2015, and he kind of inspired me, and so I filed and I ran for office for the first time 2016, before the deadline there. I got my first experience with Alaska politics. And I got to learn about a lot of the different districts. And I had attended my district meetings before. We lived in District 10 for a bit of time. And we went out to Willow for a couple different meetings, especially during the presidential campaign and during the election then. But I strongly supported President Trump at the time, and I still do. Our country's at a crossroads here. We really have to elect conservative people. We have to elect like-minded conservatives, and I think that's very important, is putting like-minded conservatives in office at the same time. Because if you look, basically this binding caucus puts the power of a few in control of the legislature, and basically there's a pledge in support to eliminate the binding caucus. And basically it's regarding for financial issues that affect the state. The reason why our budgets are getting bigger and bigger is because of this binding caucus, and how of our leaders are afraid to go against the binding caucus, which we saw what happened this year within this binding caucus, how it affects people's ability to represent the people. So basically, you're muted, as Vern was telling us. So I'm definitely against the binding caucus, and probably my strongest suit that I followed most closely. So when I grew up, we moved from Alaska when I was little. But every time, whenever you have to do anything, people always ask, where were you born, or you're filling out paperwork. I got in a lot of conversations about Alaska, even though I didn't remember Alaska. I always had a great desire to return to the state of Alaska. And so I had that opportunity in the military, which brought me back here in 2009. I got orders to Iraq. I'd been in the military 18 years. I always had Alaska on the top of my list, but I actually never got to choose it because of the career field I was in. I worked on nuclear bombers for 10 years. And because I worked in the maintenance field, I like to fix things. So I got my accounting degree while I was working on nuclear bombers. And so I've always looked forward to doing budgets. And as I became a master sergeant in the Air Force, and I got this assignment here at Elmendorf, I was able to come back to the base where I was born. I was able to look at budgets and do budgets for 3 or 4 years. And when I was in Iraq, I worked on contracts. And when you look at the financial sheets for the state, I know Jim Crawford put out a report recently that showed that I think it's $7.7 billion of funding that's on the books that could be reutilized by the state. So there's a lot of things that we have to look at. But the biggest thing for me was, as I learned about the permanent fund and how we have shared resources within the state of Alaska, that the permanent fund, I'm always for the Hammond 50-50 plan. I say it's 50-50 or no deal, because anytime you give the government more than 50% of a shared resources, such as our permanent fund dividend, what it does is the design of the dividend allows us to invest in our resources. And when we're not investing in our resources, we're not growing the state of Alaska. So when I look at the dividend, when I came back to Alaska, it was around $37 billion, and right now it's at $67 billion. So the fund has been growing, and the formula has worked for 40 years, and I believe in that formula, and I believe that we must maintain this separation, this 50-50 structure, to not only build toward the future, but to protect our resources in a way that we would want to develop them. I'm definitely a no on one, and I feel that that's thing is we have to invest in our state to be successful. And like an example on the dividend, I like numbers. I'm a numbers guy. Last year, our permanent fund dividend earned $6 billion. Our earnings reserve was up to $17.6 billion as of the beginning of the year. In fact, if you look in the voter guide, you'll see that the earnings reserve shows $17.6 billion. But recently, as of July, the legislature, part of which David Wilson, my competitor who is involved in, they recently transferred $5 billion from the earnings reserve to the corpus of the fund. And what I see when they did that, this is what I see. I see that those earnings belong to the people. Yeah, you can put it back in the core years, but considering the fact that we were in a pandemic and that the people of Alaska really needed their full dividend, you can see how the leadership of the Senate, those that I call Rino Republicans, are those that believe strongly in growing government and building up the special interests. But the most important special interest is the people of Alaska. And so having a year like this without a full dividend really tells you what we have in as our representatives. And you can even see that at some of the local levels with the CARES Act money that was provided by the federal government to the state. They're not utilizing it. They would rather, instead of helping the business that they were crushing, they would rather keep them for their own special interests. And see, that's why the fund dividend is structured the way it has been and the way it needs to continue forward. And so I'm all about restoring the full dividend and paying a full dividend to the people of Alaska. And that's just some of the things that I think about as I've run for office, is how that our legislature, because of the binding caucus, because they're not listening to the people, there's a lot of folks that are going to be replaced. And I hope to be that candidate that can replace one of these, what I consider a Rino Republican. I put those on my signs. I know it's not nice to call people names, but in this case, it's well deserved. Anyways, the main thing that I wanted to say is this all started with an independent governor who wanted to cut our dividend the first time. And then we also have an issue with the judicial system. The judges that believe that this shared resource belongs to the government more so than to the people. So I believe that these things need to be corrected. We're going to have to find a better way to hire our judges than what we currently have. That's another thing that needs to be looked at with a constitutional convention, is how our judges are selected. And I think that as a whole, Governor Walker did three things that affected our economy. That's one of the things that I studied. I talked with legislative finance, and I got their charts that they had, and I looked at their charts really closely, and they had a change in 2012 of how they did their charts. And basically, the way they did show how big health and social services was getting, and really that's a concern. The size of health and social services, all the optional services we are now paying for, and the direct impact on the budget. Now that the judges ruled that the dividend could be put into the budget, the only thing they're cutting out of the budget right now is the permanent fund at the moment. So we really need to get that under control. To working with like-minded conservatives on the budget and fixing a lot of the issues that we have with the budget, because it's about $1 billion that we've increased in costs just in Medicaid. So, and basically that's where your dividend's going currently. Because if you look at it, $1,000 is $660 million. So $1 billion is almost $1,500. So that's something that I really think that we need to look at. And it's really going to take conservatives and people that step up to the challenge and do things differently within the state. And anyways, I wanted to conclude with I'm glad that you guys all came out to support me today, and I'm going to do the best I can as a writing candidate to win the vote of the people and to help restore Alaska and make Alaska great again. And I'd like to thank you for your time today. And I did have a down here question and answer. If anybody has any questions, I would like to address those if you have any questions. Vern.
The audience, how many people are voting no on one?
Oh, yes. So how many?
You don't have a sign, please pick those up, because I don't want to put them back in my car.
We have some extra no on one signs for those of you that support the Alaska economy and of our resources, which we definitely need. I did. What's this here? Oh, you want me to talk about?
We write you in, it has to be written just like it is up there, last name first and first name.
When I talked to the elections about writing candidates, they told me it's intent. Even if your name is misspelled, they'll bring it before the committee there that's looking at the ballots, and they'll decide at the time what the intent is of the vote. So it doesn't have to be spelled exactly right, is what they told me. So I hope that's true.
I don't know the rules about voting areas. Are you able to have one of these sample ballots like this to show people what to do outside the vote?
Yeah, okay. On election day, you have to be 200 feet away from the precinct. So you can display your material, but you can't be within the 200-foot range by law, so by the statutes for elections. So like election day over here, like we had different candidates set up out here just north of this parking lot, because this is where one of the voting precincts are. And
So Steve, when you make it into office, and inevitably one of these days, right? We know about reverse sweep on budgeting.
yeah,
We also know about
okay.
reappropriation. And they tried to get that under control one time. And I recall from my own experience having some money that was sitting it's already money spent once it's budgeted out. You're aware of that. And this money was sitting in a can damn near 10 years.
Yeah, I think that's a problem. I think that just should be swept back into the Constitutional Budget Reserve. The Constitutional Budget Reserve is a protected account that, actually, I didn't finish what I wanted to say about this plan I had. But we need we need to utilize the Constitutional Budget Reserve in bringing back the funds because they can be voted out. But the problem is with budgeting is the legislature wants what they call, let me get this correct, they want the money to be in a general fund. And a general fund is basically an any purpose spend on anything fund. But if you protect it in a constitutional account, say the Constitutional Budget Reserve, then you're going to have access to it, but you're only going to have access to it for specific reasons. So my idea with the Constitutional Budget Reserve is at the 50-50 split. If you look at my diagram that I made from when they transfer the funds every year on July 1st to the budgets, they need to transfer these funds into a constitutionally protected account, like the Constitutional Budget Reserve, because with the legislature working correctly in budgeting things appropriately, we need to designate certain things as infrastructure dollars so we can build the opportunity to develop our resources further. And I think in a Constitutional Budget Reserve type account, you're not going to get these any purpose dollars being spent. And of course, the reverse sweep is a major idea that needs to occur every year as your budgets finalized, instead of spending it out like they do in the military or other places in government, instead of spending it on new furniture or whatever you're going to do for the year, it should go back into the constitutional budget reserve as a sweep of funds. And my big idea is to have a constitutional dividend reserve. So when the money is transferred annually, that the funds that belong to the people go, the 50% share go into a dividend reserve account, where it can't be drawn except for payments of dividend or a vote of the people, maybe to designate it somewhere else. But I think that's the key is in the way they do the budgeting process is once you put the money in the budget, then it's competing. And you don't want an account like the permanent fund to compete with everyday accounts, because that account belongs to people. Now, the 50% that the government has ability to use, the reason why they haven't been using it, and they transferred $5 billion back into the core, back into the account, is because the reason why they did that transfer is they want to grow it for future years, and that is what I see as the problem is they're protecting it for bigger year government, where it needs to go to the people, at least the 50% that's designated for the people. And that's how I see it. Can we get to that point? You know, we have to have like-minded legislatures that are willing to put another constitutional account out that would protect the dividend. And the other reason they don't have a consensus is because you have a different balance of power every time we have an election. So that consensus isn't going to be there. So the Democrats might want to spend it on this, and the Republicans might have something else in mind. But those funds, I believe, are supposed to be used for more infrastructure type spending and essential type services, which would be how I would suggest that it be appropriated. So the problem is with what they did recently to dividend is they consider it now an appropriation where it shouldn't be. And the funds that are earned, like for example, we earned $6 billion last year. Typically, a $3,000 dividend is only $1.8 billion. And what they did was they super inflation-proofed the account by transferring $5 billion into the core of the account. You know, and they're protecting it from themselves, but they're also preventing it from going to the people. So I consider that a foul on the legislature's part. But anyway, any other questions? Okay. We have closings by,
Before I forget, Stephen gave me kudos for everything that's done to me, I guess, but it's not on me. I want to give a shout out to Gayleen Mahoney. Gayleen did 90% of the decorations, and we were bringing all the centerpieces and everything. And so my sincere she went above and beyond. So I have to tell you just a short little thing. She had bought tablecloths, and I couldn't get a hold of her the one day, and I was headed down to Walmart for 4 hours of texting. And so finally I went and bought some tablecloths because I was nervous she might forget, because I was an event planner for years and years back east. She had a tablecloth. Her comment was, Diane, if I say I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it. So I had to learn to trust people a little more. What I wanted to do was just say that we desperately need help on election day especially. We need people at the voting stations to hold signs and also to speak with people. If there's anyone here that's willing to donate their time, we need 12, 13 people that are willing to be at all the different, they're all local, they're local voting places. If you could see me or Jessica afterwards and we can get your name and number that you have interest in helping with that, we really would sincerely appreciate it. And at this time, we're going to have an auction, so the money website, besides the radio and the signs, there's also some newspaper ads. There's Facebook things going on, there's a website, so all those things add up. So anyway, Warren, I understand you're going to do the auction. Yeah.
This first item, you have to use your imagination for. Because the item isn't here, but if you buy it, it will be sent to you, right? This is a book. It's called Don't Use a Chainsaw in a Kitchen by, what's her name, Laura Stella? Yeah. Anyway, it tells you how to, the subtitle is From Shopped to Dinner. Something to that effect. So it tells you how to deal with living in the bush, living off the land, shooting an animal and taking care of it from the time you shoot it to the time it's good.
Thank you all for joining us here today. Don't forget to like and share. If you happen to be in the Senate District D, don't forget to write in Stephen Wright for Senate District D. He is a conservative candidate that is not like the rhinos that we currently see here in Alaska running in our election out here in this territory. Thank you all again for joining us here today. And like and share. Go to my website, politidic.com. Click that donation button and help us so that we can afford to be able to make more of these events on a daily basis. Thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon.